for today's Fire Engineering Google's Hangout. Today we're live here in New Haven, Connecticut with Frank Ritchie. We have Ernie Santamont and other members of New Haven's Union's Executive Board. We're going to be talking about safety committees. We also have a great guest coming to us today from Atlanta. We have Bart McCool. Bart is sponsoring Tenkata Fabrics. Frank and I are very excited that this is our first Google Hangout that will now be sponsored by Tenkata. And most of us are not familiar with Tenkata Fabrics. You know, we're all familiar with what type of turnout gear we have. You know, I can tell you whether we wear Morning Pride, you wear Globe, or you wear Innotex, you wear Lions. Well, most firefighters don't realize that just about all of our gear, actually 7 out of 10 firefighters, rely on fabrics that are provided by Tenkata. So Tenkata provides the fabrics for our firefighter turnout gear. Regardless of what manufacturer you wear, they're the companies who just assemble, stitch, and sew our gear together. But Tenkata actually supplies the fabrics. They're a company based out of Atlanta. They're headquartered out of Atlanta, but they're worldwide. They have turnout gear and firefighting fabrics in Australia and Africa, all over the United States. We'll get into some of those places a little bit later in the show, but we're honored to have Bart here also with us today. So we're going to talk about safety committees, we're going to talk about PP, risk assessment, and we're just going to run it like we normally do. We're just going to roll around the table here, talk about a couple current topics, and then we're going to go over to Bart and talk about the actual risk assessments for turnout gear. So Frank, welcome back. I know it's been a while since we've actually correlated our schedules together, so it's kind of coming back together again. Excited to be together today.
Thanks, PJ. And we're here today in the Union office in New Haven, and we have the Vice President of the Union, Mark Vendetto, and a brand new Safety Committee member, Chris Brigham, and our insurance rep that reps for the City of New Haven, Ernie Santamont. And we're going to explain some of the ins and outs of how to make your safety committee effective. But first, I would really like to thank Bart, and I'd like you to introduce yourself to our viewers out there and tell us a little bit about yourself and about your company.
Okay. So I'm Bart McCool. I work for Tenkata Protective Fabrics as end-use marketing manager, and all that means is I'm the link between our engineers that design fabric and our marketing department and our sales department. I'm the link between all these different divisions and the end users, which is the firefighters. So whenever new ideas come to from the fire service, it's me who it kind of goes through to the engineers, to the marketing, and also my peer Tom Foley and I, both of us spend a lot of time educating firefighters and a lot of time with the risk assessment. Tenkata Protective Fabrics, all we do is protective fabrics. We do obviously make the fire service protective fabrics, but every element of what you wear, we make an engineered fabric for that, from a T-shirt to a Class B uniform shirt to your uniform pants. The odds are it's coming that we're making it. We're also in the oil and gas industry, electrical workers, and the military. So every Army soldier or Marine that goes into a theater of war today switches their BDUs into a fabric that our engineers designed specifically for them. So, but all we do is protective fabrics.
Well, thank you for what you do. And if I understand correctly, while you sell worldwide, your fabrics are actually manufactured in the United States. Is that correct?
That's correct. All the fabrics that we sell in the United States and some of the world comes from Georgia. So everything is, all of our manufacturing plants are south of Atlanta. So we have a yarn plant that we make our own yarn. We then weave it into a fabric, so we have a weaving plant, and then we have a dyeing and finishing plant, and all those are within 50 miles of Atlanta.
That's great. It's great to see manufacturing alive in America. Everybody says that everything's overseas, but you guys are living proof that you're doing it right here. And the other thing I want to point out about Bart is he's not just the pretty face of the company. He was also a firefighter for 20 years. So he's not just a marketing guy. When he's out there and he's talking to firefighters, he knows our business. He's been in fires. He knows what's going on. We're going to move to health and safety committees, and then we're going to move back to gear assessment. And I got Mark Vendetto here with us, and he was the president of our Health and Safety Committee. Now, in New Haven, we've had a very successful partnership with management and the insurance company over the years. And I want Mark to kind of explain what goes into a quality health and safety program. How do you get all the players at the table in that advocacy role, in a non-adversarial role, to get things done for firefighters, Mark?
Well, one of the first things we had to do was reach out to our membership. We had to get involvement from the members, get them to buy into it. I got the non-safety committee members involved in their specialty, and they came involved. Then we sat down with the city with an open mind. We sat down, we talked, we discussed what our major problems were, we listed them in an order, and we start tackling them one at a time. As far as getting firefighters on turnout gear on the regular rotation basis, Nomex hoods that we got to the firefighters, a wellness program that we instituted, but it took a lot. We sat down with the city, we understand that there's budget constraints out there, we worked within those, and we sat down as long. We had our short-term goals and our long-term goals, and we met them, and we went about it. But it is a process that you really got to lay out. You have to talk to your memberships and see what's their concerns, and then go to the city with them and see what they can do financially, and then sit down and talk and have an open dialogue.
One of the things that we have in our collective bargaining agreement is it stipulates that the union and the fire department has to come together for quarterly or monthly meetings to meet and try to settle these issues. And we don't just walk into the meeting with a hammer and say, you're violating this. What Mark really was able to do was to get people to buy into firefighter health and safety. It's pro-management, it's pro-labor, and what you find is when you break down the barriers and you're not just filing charges, you can actually realize that you have a lot of common goals. Now, of course, as firefighters out there, nothing happens as quick as you want it to happen. We're so geared that as soon as that bell hits, everything's on fire, you got to go put it out. And if you're going to work with management, you got to realize that not everything is on fire. And it's going to take some time to build consensus and to get that out. Now, Mark, can you just tell us a couple of the things, key things over the years that we advocated for as a safety committee that are now in place because of labor and management working together?
We sat down, and one of the first things we were concerned about was the diesel exhaust systems in the stations, and we got those in place. That was one of the first big things we put in place, the Opticon system that we put in place. We also went out and got a voluntary wellness program up and running, something that the union would actually fight the city about. And once we talked to our membership and they were interested in it, and we took it on as a voluntary thing, we were able to get a wellness program into place. So there are physicals, and they come around, and we do flu shots and blood pressure and cholesterol screening, and we have the most participation within the city because our members wanted it. It was a buy-in from the membership that was key. We have Nomex hoods for all of our members now. When I got on 16 years ago running this, we didn't have Nomex hoods. So that was a big thing once we finally got the Nomex hoods to come in. And the city realized and they invested in it. So we've seen a lot of good things come through the program. That's just a quick little...
We also got radios for our members, and Mark hit upon diesel exhaust recovery systems, and this also has to do with our sponsor here today, because now that we're understanding more about gases and chemicals, your firefighting gear is in the station. So if you don't have an exhaust recovery system, those byproducts are going on your gear. Now I'm going to go to Bart for a quick second here. One of the things that Bobby Halton and I were talking about with your manufacturer is that a lot of your fabrics don't have the same off-gassing principles of other fabrics that are made by chemicals. Can you hit upon that? Because that, the more and more we see out there, whether it's a carpet, whether it's a kid's baby bottle, we're talking about how these plastics, how these chemicals are actually off-gassing, harming our citizens and firefighters. Can you just talk about how your gear limits that to an extent?
Sure. So there's a misconception, I think, as in the firefighter world, that we're taking fabric that is non-fire resistant fibers and then chemically treating it as you would a mattress in a crib or carpeting or a couch, correct?
Yes.
Or an airplane seat. So what's different about what you're wearing is that the fibers are inherently fire resistant. So there's no chemical treatment that when they develop these aramid polymer fibers, they're ultimately fire resistant by design. So when you look at your outer shells, for example, or your thermal liners or your Nomex hood, doesn't matter. All that, there is no chemical treatment that makes that fabric that's going to off-gas. Now, one of the realities, though, is that if any material on Earth gets hot enough, right, and reaches its ignition temperature, because everything will burn, then there's off-gassing. But the difference we need to make is that that the fibers that you're wearing, that a firefighter today in the United States is wearing, is all inherently FR.
That's fantastic.
Frank, I'd like to say yesterday the memberships of TNCATA, Chief Halton, Chief Roden did a great educational hangout live from TNCATA. So anybody watching today that definitely wants more information about specific, some of the things we're going to cover today, like the risk assessment, but how their fabrics are made and more about the company, I would reference them back to yesterday's Google Hangout. It was a little over an hour long. It was just packed with educational information for all of us to learn more about our gear, but also as we're talking about safety committees today, as your safety committee starts looking into your needs assessment, your risk assessment, your PPE, or trying to figure out what PPE you need, and you're going to partnership with your, with your administration. It's a great educational piece that they did yesterday that could be sent out to all your safety committee membership as well to give them some more education on the actual fabrics of the gear. And that was yesterday on fire engineering.
And as PJ was saying, and you heard the list from my vice president, you saw how vast and how wide of a range that the safety committee actually has to address. Basically, any safety issue that's a concern of your members is going to come up through the union administration or come up through the chain of command. It can work both ways, and we're going to meet on it. But there's not one individual out there that's an expert on everything, and we've got to be willing to reach out to the experts out there. If we're doing gear, reach out to Bart. If we're doing radios, reach out to somebody in your membership that has an expertise in radios. One of the great things that Mark was able to do as chair of the safety committee that was never done before was he opened it up to the membership and he took input from the membership. So if you had a particular topic that you were passionate about, he would set you up, explain the process to you, you'd put together the presentation, and you'd be invited to the safety committee to give that presentation. A perfect example of that is Lieutenant Brigham is not on our executive board, but yet yesterday he was put on the health and safety. So we're reaching out and we're trying to get member involvement. Chris, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us some of the things you'd like to see in your health and safety committee?
Well, as Frank said, I'm a lieutenant with the New Haven Fire Department, a newer lieutenant at that. I was previously assigned to our paramedic unit in the city. And as we know, here in New Haven, the paramedic unit is one of the busier units in the city, if not the busiest in the state here. And with that background, it provides myself as a new officer with a different viewpoint, and it was able to I was able to work with Mark here as far as establishing certain standards that the paramedics required on our end as far as our needs and our necessities that otherwise we were a fairly underrepresented minority of the department. And we were able to work together to, like I said, achieve, as Frank mentioned, achieve getting radios for all our members and establishing a little bit of a buffer between the paramedics and the rest of the department and kind of bridge that gap, which operationally has set us up to be much more safer, not only on running our EMS calls, but on the fire ground as well. And as a new member of the safety committee, it's given me much more momentum at this point to get some things changed, and between working with all the other different members of the committee who have a wide variety of experience and background, that we can make the whole department safer for ourselves, which benefits the members as well as the city, and decrease their liability of putting ourselves in harm's way.
Great. Now, one of the things that we learned was there was an undervalued asset at our disposal as a safety committee, and I think that a lot of departments out there across the country may not even be aware of it, because sometimes there's a divide between the insurance company who insures the fire department and the safety. Need to get out there and make that contact, because not only do we develop a great relationship with our insurance carrier, but they've also provided training that the department's paying for the insurance company anyway. And if they do their research, a lot of that training is part of that initial fee, and it's kind of an underused resource. I'd like to go to Ernie St. Haman, and he's done some great things for us in New Haven. Explain your role on the Health and Safety Committee and kind of how insurance companies can help health and safety committees across the country, because it's an undervalued resource.
Yeah, not a problem. Thanks, Frank. First of all, I want to clear up a couple quick things. PMA Companies is not the City of New Haven's insurance company. We were actually awarded a bid to provide risk control and safety resources. So I want to kind of separate that, because that's a monumental task. And I'll share with you that I service close to 27 different municipalities, some that are large, some that are throughout the United States that we get to travel to, but I've never been part of an organization, and I call it an organization because really with executive officers, mayor, on down, you're dealing with an organization that has accepted an outside person to come in, to provide services, to look and be objective, to support the ideas that are brought up by the members inside the community safety committees, but add a different aspect or a different level, saying, okay, this is what has worked in the past. I understand what you want to accomplish. Let's get it there on a professional platform. Work with the executive leadership, the chiefs, the fire officers, and everyone else. You know, Frank mentioned, and I know Mark had mentioned, I've sat on the committee with Mark since 2009.
I was going to say 1909.
Yeah.
Wow,
that's
pretty good. Now we know he's an insurance guy.
So, yeah. so
Always
since,
playing with the numbers.
So, yeah, 2009, and you know, there's a lot of pride. And as we bring this to the workers' comp carriers, we're seeing reduction in numbers. And Mark mentioned a really key point about the health and safety piece. The City of New Haven has adopted a great health program, and one of the things that I'm always shocked and always look back and inspired about was you lost close to 700 pounds when you guys did a weight loss initiative. So the department itself collectively jumped on and said, we got to take care of our backs, our shoulders, but let's look at it from a humanistic quality. How can we help them get into better shape? As I sit here, we're all drinking Dunkin' Donuts and eating, coffee and stuff like that. But what I want to share is there was a systematic approach, and to echo Mark's sentiments about going to the table without a heavy hand and opening it up to the chiefs at the time. It is the most sustainable program that we have in the City of New Haven. We see the most training. I've been welcomed into every possible arena, every house, and to me, that as a consultant, that offers, I guess you can say that it offers that I've been accepted, and that's what the leadership has done. So whether it's a union leadership that are at the table at the safety committee, whether it's a union leadership that are wearing the brass, we just got to collectively say what's in it for our members, what's in it for the betterment of the City of New Haven. How can we get into the other term we don't like to say is regulatory compliance? Mm-hmm. And we kind of want to share that piece, that there's always a component of regulatory compliance, which is the bare minimum of what we should be doing on safety. And then how can we do an end around and make it adaptable and sustainable for the department? 20 plus years doing safety committee education, numerous other activities, and I think we're seeing what I call traction. So we're seeing sustainable traction. And I think that's a key component when you talk about a dynamic safety committee, that we have people moving in and out of. We have topics that are being tabled to another quarter or another month, and we're still on task to bite at those every month. And that's the traction.
And for some examples, Ernie also represents my department. I am a training division of one, so it makes it extremely challenging for the training and the education piece of the career staff and also the volunteer staff. So I rely on Ernie a lot. We've done some risk assessments. I've utilized him and his expertise for bloodborne pathogen training, airborne pathogen training. I've been doing that same training as safety officer over 6 years now. When I
they don't want to hear you.
When they don't want to hear me.
Nobody wants to hear them.
They don't want to hear me about anything, let alone that topic. So I work with Ernie, so he helps me out with that stuff. We've done EVOC programs. We've done health programs for backs. We've done some diversity training.
Right.
We've done a whole bunch of different training where we tag team stuff. So it's not just the suit and tie guy standing up front, talking to them on how we need to be safer. We also could put it into a street perspective where we can tag team stuff. And I think getting down into the weeds and really evaluating what needs to be done. You kind of said something key to begin with. Looking at the big picture. Some of the things that I've seen is we either focus on the real small, minute things or the real big things, and we never put some timelines in favor. We want it done now, But like you said, the administration, the management can't get some of this big stuff done within 2 weeks or 2 months. So you got to look at sometimes the big picture, but also balance that, that small, minute stuff of what can we chip off today and what can we get done next year, and utilizing, your risk and safety officer like Ernie to really look at a global perspective is key.
I tell you, one of the key things we did, Frank, I don't know if you remember back, and we wanted to get the Opticon system up and running in the city, and the city was purchasing and spending money, and the chief just wouldn't put them on the apparatus. And we actually went to the city itself. We went to the director of traffic and parking, and we sat down, we talked to him, we invited him into one of the meetings. And he came in and made the presentation on our behalf. And the chief was stunned, and a week later we got the Opticons put on the apparatus.
And just for some of our listeners out there who may not be familiar with the trade name, the Opticon system is a strobe light system that actually changes the lights to green as the apparatus is responding.
Yeah, it gives us the right away.
So what we were finding was the traffic and parking was putting into the bid every time they upgraded the traffic light.
Millions of dollars.
Millions of dollars, this system, and it was just there, and the fire department just at the time chose not to use it. So sometimes bringing in other partners, and that was, I think, that was the key to Mark's success as chairman, was that he didn't just hold all that information. John Mayer said, information's power because you can bend it all you want type of thing. We don't go by that anymore. We try to get the information out there. We try to educate our members, and the more people you can bring to the table, the more you're going to get accomplished, because especially if you got a committee where you can take a couple guys and put them on their pet projects, and then as time allows, then you allow them to do those presentations. You build up those individuals, and you also build up your safety committee. Now, PJ, there's also a little misconception out there that the department safety officer is the safety committee and the health and safety committee, and that is not the case. We kind of help the safety officer. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, as the training officer of the training division of 1, like I said, I'm also tasked as the safety officer. But we don't have any documents on as far as the health and wellness officer. We don't have a defined health and wellness officer. So who does that automatically fall on? Training, right? It falls on me. So unfortunately, that's too much for any one person to do. Luckily, we're a much smaller department than New Haven, but we have 44 career staff positions, have almost 100 volunteers. So that's a big undertaking. So clearly understand that the safety officer is your incident safety officer, and your health and safety officer is a health and safety officer. Two totally different things. You're looking at the overall health and well-being of the membership versus the initial on-scene incident stuff. And there is a gap, there is a gray area where there is some overlap. But that's where working with somebody like Ernie comes into play. Like I know Ernie did a program for New Haven Fire Department that he did for East Haven where, if you go online and you want to do a lifting and moving program, that's great. Stand straight up, bend with use your legs, don't bend your back. But there's nothing that we do in the fire service where we can lift so perfectly like that. So we were able to work with Ernie like you were to define a lifting program that's appropriate for the fire service. When we're lifting, a hearse tool and you're cutting up above your head, how are you going to do that effectively without blowing out your back? So those are the things that bringing everybody to the table and putting all of our brains together makes it work. But understand that even though that's a health and wellness, it also affects the incident safety.
Right.
So what you do in health and wellness and the prevention behind the scenes significantly increases, makes my job as the incident safety officer much easier.
There's also another secret, and then I'll go right to Ernie here, about the benefit of having a health and safety committee. If you're the department safety officer out there and you have an idea and you bring it to your boss, the chief, and he says no, guess what just happened to your idea? It's dead in the water right there. So by having that health and safety committee stand alone, it's actually another resource, because what I find is that chiefs want to behave a whole lot better when there's a consultant in the room, when there's the city's comp administrator in the room.
Yeah.
So it's another avenue, and don't get me wrong, we're going to always accomplish more when labor and management works together, and Mark and that committee has proven that. But there are some times where you're going to just get that no as the safety officer, and you have to know that you can go to your health and safety committee and kind of have someone else run it up the flagpole and you may be surprised. You may get a different result.
The only thing I want to mention, make sure that everybody remembers, is we're all currently union firefighters, but the majority of the U.S. Fire Service is not career firefighters with unions. So what we're talking about today, even though we put a collective bargaining agreement topic on it, or we put a union executive board, that doesn't matter. Whether you're career, volunteer, paid on call, the same practices that we're talking about could play within your department. We're a combination department. I have 4 individual volunteer companies. I have an individual explorer, which is our cadet program, and our career staff. And we utilize the same exact processes and procedures for the career and volunteer staff, all the way down to our explorers. So just because we're talking labor management stuff, you still have to have those same agreements for the volunteer fighting force as well.
And I think that the end game, whether it's the safety committee or the safety officer of the department, it's not only to get out of the incident safe or to get to the end of or go home safely, but it's to get to the end of your career and enjoy a full and healthy retirement, whether you're retiring from the fire service or from you're a volunteer and you're retiring from a private agency of some other sort, but you want to enjoy a full healthy life. And the combination of the safety committee and the safety officer could come up with these solutions that are going to protect us on the fire ground and throughout our whole career.
Kevin Shea told me one time at FDIC is when he was a kid, the nun at school, Catholic school, looked down at him and said, "Kevin, what do you want to do when you grow up?" Now, Kevin Shea is a legend. He was the guy hanging off the rope in Manhattan to make the rescues during that fire. And he looked at the nun and he said, "Ma'am, when I grow up, I want to be a retired firefighter." So we all want to make sure we get to retirement safely.
Just before we get to Ernie, I just want to remind all the listeners out there who's watching us today, have some questions, send them in to us. We have a whole group of great experience here. We also have Bart McCool from Tenkata sitting in the wings, we're waiting to get to him. So if you have any questions, the hashtag FETalk. Put that up on Twitter. We'll get to those questions and we'll answer as many as we can. And if we get too many like we have in the past, we will then email those back out to you or direct message them through Twitter back to you. So make sure you're aware of that. Before we get to Ernie again, I also just want to mention we're grateful and very thankful for Tenkata Protective Fabrics, who's sponsoring this Google Hangout today. We've been doing this for a long time with fire engineering, unsponsored, and it's not always so easy. We're grateful to have this wonderful sponsor for us today. And Frank, take a look at this list of places where Tenkata has fabrics.
New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Houston, I'll add one, New Haven, San Diego, Dallas, Netherlands, Great Britain,
across the pond, nice.
Across the pond, South Africa, Australia, the Middle East. It's very impressive to know that we have an American manufacturer keeping firefighters safe every day with natural products. And one of the things that Bart was talking about, he mentioned airline seats, and I've been doing a lot of study on fire retardants lately. And the airline industry, they put more chemicals in it to make their fabrics fire retardant. And what they did was, it seems quite apparent now, that they created a problem tenfold of what the original problem was because of the off-gassing and the products of combustion. So having those natural fibers, and Bart made it clear that everything off-gasses at a temperature, but starting off with those natural fibers, I think definitely has a benefit. Now, Bart, any good health and safety committee is going to be involved in some way or fashion with their gear spec for their fire department. And one thing Ernie was able to bring up earlier was he talked about your health and safety committee's role in trying to find regulatory compliance. And a lot of our listeners out there, or viewers, would probably tell you that they think that there's one NFPA standard for gear and all gear is made equal. As long as it's got that NFPA stamp on it, then that's what the gear was. And I will be honest, I was very naive to this up until a couple years ago. I didn't realize that firefighters in Phoenix, Arizona wear a totally different gear spec than we wear in the Northeast. I was one of those individuals who thought, hey, if it's a NFPA compliant garment, then we are good to go. I didn't understand total heat loss and TPP. Sure. So if you could kind of enlighten what you bring to the table, because what I like about the fabric manufacturer coming to the table is you've already sold your product to each manufacturer that manufactures your product. So I view you as a more honest broker because you're talking about your product. So I think you're a resource that is probably a little bit underutilized, and I think that fire chiefs, unions, and fire departments across the country would want a representative from your company there to kind of serve as those honest broker to explain the differences in fabrics and also to explain some of those key terms that go into picking out that gear spec. So I think I had like 6 questions in there. So go ahead.
Well, let me start by explaining. I totally understand, and it's music to my ears that you are active in your health and safety committee, and you're blessed, and most states are blessed, and we were blessed in the state of Oregon to have collective bargaining and to have earned a right at that seat, right? Somewhere along the line, our predecessors gave something up to have a seat and talk safety. So that's a real honor. What I like to preach is to firefighters is, okay, you have a seat, but do you know what questions to ask when it comes to protective clothing, right? And when we talk the NFPA standards, for example, the NFPA standard is the one and only professional standard that we have in our occupation. Now, as you know, sometimes it's chiefs, sometimes it's firefighters who want to say, you know, that's just a guideline, it's not the law, and that's a fact. But the reality is, if we want to continue making our profession more professional, we have one standard. Now, the other thing about NFPA standard is it's a minimum standard. Right. So I always ask, and you know, I'll ask you, do you deserve to be in more than the minimum when it comes to safety and protection? Well, every firefighter's going, well, yeah, I do. Okay. So the NFPA standard has a purpose. It's there. We need it, and we need to participate, and you do participate. You have seats at that NFPA table, right? The IFF has seats. End users have seats, and they have to be equal to the manufacturers in those standards. But what's more important, and a lack of understanding, is it's a federal law that your fire department has done a risk assessment to document what level of safety your firefighters should be in based off the hazards, the possibility of what hazards you're going to encounter in your job duties. So it's way more than a professional standard. It's a federal law that you have a document explaining exactly what level, what hood you buy, for example. You mentioned Nomex, but there's probably, let's say there's 16 combinations probably on the market with different combinations of fibers and hoods. And there's a range of thermal protection from 0 to 100, let's say. So even with a hood, it's imperative that you have a reason why you've chosen that material for that hood, for what's appropriate for what New Haven, what your strategy and tactics are, what kind of structures you take care of, what's your current training, right? And those are some of the things that we look at when we try to quantify what level of protection you're in. To put the risk assessment in a box, it's simply, my question to you is, why do you wear what you wear? That's the question I want to answer when I come help a department do a risk assessment. I was on I had a very influential captain who happened to be our union president, and when I was a probationary firefighter, he said, if you want to be anybody in this department, you need to be on the safety committee. So I thought I didn't realize I was being trapped on that my whole career, but it was a fun experience because you are sitting across from management, and you do have a say, and that was a lot, and that was fun. So it's good for me to hear that everyone takes it seriously, and it's in everyone's best interests, right? For safety, it's management's best interests, it's firefighters' best interests that you are in a safe level of protective clothing.
Bart,
yeah.
Explain as part of that risk assessment, because all firefighters tend to go with thermal protection, that value, that TPP, and they don't take into account the total heat loss, where, yes, if you get caught in that flashover situation, that TPP is critical. However, you're being exposed to the stresses of wearing your gear, not just when you're in a flashover, but which may only happen once or twice in your career. You're being exposed to the total heat loss value every single time you put on your gear. And we all know out there that heart attacks are still leading cause of non-combat firefighter deaths. So a lot of departments out there, they don't find that sweet spot between those two numbers. Can you elaborate on those two numbers and why it's important to find a balance with them?
Yeah, the Thermal Protective Performance Test, or the TPP test, is a simple test of all three composites, right? Your outer shell, moisture barrier, and thermal liner. And all it does is subject from your outer shell out to 1800 degrees direct flame and radiant heat, and it simply measures how long it takes that 1800 degrees to penetrate through your three layers. And when the face cloth on your thermal liner reaches 131 degrees, the test stops. 131 degrees is at the point where our skin blisters. So we typically feel pain at about 111 degrees. We've all been where we're moving around, right? Feeling pain. Our skin reaches a first degree burn at roughly 118, and then we blister at 131. So what this test is measuring is our composite as we wear it. How long is it going to take in a flashover type condition? That's what the test is about. Before we receive a blister, is what the test is. Now, that's one simple test. And then, as you said, we have a huge problem, big problem with cardiac-related deaths on the fire ground. And ultimately, that has a lot to do with our blood being too hot and our body core temperature being too hot. So the other side of the testing is called the total heat loss test, which is a measurement of how easily does energy get through the three layers in the test. That equates to how much energy or how much heat we can release through those three layers. And what I try to explain is you don't want to hang your hat on one test, right? And I go to departments and they say, Bart, our number one thing is thermal protection. We want more thermal protection. Well, I understand that, but you can't forget about the other tests. Another simple test that I look at, and all the risk assessment is looking at all the reproducible testing that is out there and ultimately quantifying your level of safety. An example is your outer shells. There's easily 16 outer shells on the market today, and I believe that you deserve to be shown all 16, not just one. And typically manufacturers come in with one set of gear, right? And you base your decision off one three-layer system. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
And when I asked firefighters, were you showing the other 15? Well, no. And when I was in charge of, in 2000, I promoted to captain, and I was put in charge of my department.
Bart, we lost you there for a second.
Salesman came and showed me. So the result of the risk assessment, and I want to mention Fairfax County, Local 2068, because Fairfax County is a sizable department that has is a very progressive department, and they asked me to come in there to their health and safety committee and go through this, and it was eye-opening to them. When one guy said we want a high thermal protective performance test, another person said we need a higher THL test, and so that was a good experience to help a department like that really expand what are they looking for. But one of the keys is, what is the strength of an outer shell if you needed to escape? Somebody makes a mistake, you have an emergency. All your protective clothing is not tested below that thermal protective performance test, right? That test is to simulate something's gone wrong. We're in a room, everything's reaching its ignition temperature, and I have to escape. And so what I look at, for an example, is what is the strength of that outer shell at that point? How well will that outer shell perform in that 5 seconds you have to get out of that room? Or somebody falls through a roof and now they're in a live fire situation. You've sent your RIT team in to rescue them. The reality is all those instances are, if they are a possibility for your fire department, meaning if your strategy and tactics dictate that you go make an interior fire attacks, then I think you need to evaluate what is the strength of that outer shell. That's not an NFPA test, but it's a test that makes sense, and we call that above a reasonable maximum exposure. So if you're caught and you have a firefighter caught, I want you to be educated enough to know that I want that firefighter to be in 3 layers that will stay intact as long as possible. But that is far and above and beyond NFPA. But I believe that firefighters deserve to at least be educated on that so that they can make an educated decision why they've chosen what outer shell that they want to wear. And that's just one example of many. Have you ever considered that?
And I haven't until recently when I started learning more about this. And one key thing you said yesterday, which blew me out of the water, was that there's I think you said 3,500 different combinations between your outer layer, your thermal barrier, and your moisture barrier. You just referenced that there's 16 outer shells, but there's 3,500 combinations between outer shells. Is that correct, Bart?
That's correct. That's being conservative. 6 moisture barriers on the market, easily 30 thermal liners. So when you say Phoenix area firefighters wear X, Y, and Z, and in Connecticut it's common for you to wear A, B, and C, one of the criteria is what climate, right? Where you live, but there's a lot more than that. It's what kind of structures do you go to? What's in your city? Right. What's your response time? What's your training? When are you getting to a fire? Is it in at the incipient stage? And there is a possibility that you could put a firefighter at risk to making a bad decision. So those are all those decisions, but ultimately, at the end of the day, what I want you to have, the fire service to have, is a document that you have made the decision, not a salesperson on what level of safety that you should have on your firefighters.
Now, Bart, is there a difference in the material, those outer shells, and the 3-layer system? Is there a difference in the material based off the compression test as well? Because we know that as firefighters, when we tend to get burned in a flashover situation, it tends to be around the shoulders, the knees, anywhere where your gear compresses. And that's why we teach firefighters, if somebody's off-gassing, don't put a hose line on them, don't manhandle the individual. You got to do whatever you can to get the individual out. But once you get the person out, you want to essentially peel off the gear. Does the fabric play a role in that, the heat transfer through that compression test?
So there is a little bit of difference between that, but really NFPA requires you to have X amount of time compression, and that's why they require extra layers in shoulders, knees, and elbows. Okay. Right? You are absolutely correct that if you had a firefighter that came out of a fire and they're hot, you don't touch them, because if you touch them, air is our best insulator. So what you're doing is you're taking that air out of there and you're pressing that hot material up against their skin, which is raising their temperature up to the point where they burn, is what you're doing. And part of the shoulder area is that's typically the highest point that firefighter, when you crawl, your shoulder's head is the highest point, correct? And when you train firefighters, obviously we train to stay as low as possible, but the reality is that our shoulders are typically the highest point off the ground, and there can be 100-degree difference in an inch, as you know, in that room, and that's why your shoulders are more subjected to a higher temperature, therefore your skin's probably a higher temperature. But
members should realize that your shoulder straps with any SCBA manufacturer are not designed to be cinched down super tight, and you see far too many members. They got their shoulder straps cinched down and their waist strap either off or very loose. Your air pack should be carried on your hips with your waist strap always buckled. It's one of my pet peeves is to see a waist strap unbuckled, because if it's a rich situation, you want to be able to have that strap so that you can convert the harness, but also it also takes some of that compression off the shoulders of your gear.
You and I had a little fun with that with the recruit class. Do you remember that at all? I happened to see a guy not wearing his SCBA correctly, and you said, "Oh, even our insurance guy knows how to wear it. Go put it on." So I just remember poor recruit.
So Bart, we're talking about this risk assessment of our gear. For the safety committee membership here, for Ernie if he's working with a client, or for all the listeners out there, if they wanted to perform this risk assessment, if they wanted to really dive down into the meat and potatoes and perform this risk assessment, even if they're not looking to purchase gear, if they're looking to see what they have and where they're at for the future, how can they do that?
They can contact me. They can contact Tenkata as a whole, and there's two of us that do that. We also have and I'm hoping to get it correct, fdfirereport.com that is free. You sign up, and ultimately, if I'm wrong, if we can send that out electronically, but you can do it yourself.
Bart, we're dealing with firefighters here. Can you tweet out that link? Let's, this is our casual Google Hangout. Can you tweet out that link so we can send it out to all our viewers?
Yeah, I'll have our marketing department right now send it out. But ultimately, it's always better if there's someone in person to explain it to you all than looking at a document and trying to figure out what numbers you want to put in it.
And I completely agree, but having the document may give the Health and Safety Committee chairman to say, hey, there's more to this. Look at all the different stuff. We need to bring somebody else down at the table who's an expert at this, because we can't know it all, and let's really put our heads together, do that risk assessment, and figure out what is that sweet spot of where our gear should be. Because one of the things that I see, and you alluded to it earlier, is a lot of chiefs out there in departments, they take the gear spec that was already written by a previous administration, and it just, the boilerplate continues and continues and continues, and they're not doing the risk assessment that you're saying is so important. Have you seen that out there?
Yeah, so there's a difference between a specification and a risk assessment. Okay. Ultimately, the law and the professional standard 1500 and 1851 NFPA requires the employer to do a risk assessment for protective clothing. So you have that document. That doesn't name any fabrics. It doesn't say Tenkata fabrics. It names individual. It quantifies test methods of what you require above and beyond the NFPA minimum. What you do once you have that, that's a live document, right? Today you wear a Nomex hood, and let's say that out comes a super hood next year, and ultimately when someone comes to sell you hoods, you say, hold on, let us get our risk assessment. Right now, here's the level of protection. Here's the TPP we require for hoods, for example. And tell me exactly what this new material does. And if it's better, then you change your minimum standards for what you require. But what it does is, what that risk assessment provides you is protection from anybody coming in and trying to sell you something less protective for less money. And it protects your level of safety, because it keeps somebody who's looking at money going, oh, all of a sudden this hood is $64 less than that hood. That's exaggeration, but ultimately, no. What you put out then is New Haven Fire Department requires a TPP of 28, let's say, for fire hoods. So don't show me any fire hoods that are below that TPP. Does that make sense? So what you do is you take that risk assessment, and your fire chief, basically, Health and Safety Committee would write it, based off that risk assessment, you would ultimately pick an outer shell, a moisture barrier, and a thermal liner in a turnout, and you would tell all your vendors, if you want to do business with us, it's not your decision to come in and tell us what you're going to provide us. We're telling you what our level of safety is and what materials we've chosen. You build your best model of turnout if you want to be included in a wear test or the specification. Does that make sense? I want you to have the power to do that and not a vendor telling you to do that.
Ernie, what's your role as a consultant in this? Is this something that your company can help out the fire department with to kind of bring all the players together? Because sometimes it helps if the consultant sits there and says, maybe we should take a second look at this.
Absolutely. I think what we're looking at is a business approach, an analytical approach, and then presenting that as a business case to say, again, here's our bare minimum. But on my side, you always have to look at what type of losses have we had? What type of structures are we going into? What's our community around us? Where's our fire load? Where's our highest risk and hazard? And then factor that all in. I don't see an issue with anyone if they have the technical tools that's provided by Tenkata or anybody else of presenting that with either within the safety committee or even having a closed door session with the chief and saying, you know what, we have a business case here. And I think that matures the whole conversation. I hope that's answered your question.
No, it definitely answers the question, and it brings up an important point for the safety committee. Looking at lost hours and your workers' comp information really allows you to identify trends and safety issues within the safety committee. So this is something that, Chris, that you're going to be looking at that you probably weren't exposed to, is how many first report of injuries are there? What are our members going out with? Is it related to the gear? We just had a member make in a heroic effort to keep the fire in check while they were effecting a rescue on the Charlie side of the building. He got a stored energy burn, and the line got held up. His gear was saturated with heat. They were making the rescue. The officer went outside to unhook the coupling to get the hose moving again. It was hooked on the bottom stair tread outside in the snow, and firefighter Rivera basically was on a burning staircase. Knowing that they were losing water because they had a frozen hydrant, he was methodically controlling the water to keep the fire in check so they can make a rescue. And when he moved, he ended up getting second-degree burns on his bottom legs, and his gear had no damage to it. It was simply stored energy, and it finally reached that equilibrium. And here he was. He received significant burns. These second-degree burns converted to third-degree burns. The rescue was successful. And here he was when he came out and finally had to go to the burn center. And we were very concerned because something that I didn't know is that if a burn goes around any part of your body, of how important your gear is to protect you, if it goes around in the circumference, Chris, you can probably speak to this, it cuts off your circulation and makes it 10 times worse, even if it's just a second-degree burn. Is that correct?
That's correct. And we'll see that a lot with burns to the hands and other joints as well, but more specifically in the hands and the parts that are exposed from your gloves to the gauntlet of your turnout coat. But
as a medic, what's it do? It just cuts off the circulation.
Ultimately, you're gonna gain swelling over the course of the recovery soon after, and that could cut off circulation, compromising the limb from that point and beyond.
And going back to Bart, one thing that we viewed as a contributing factor to the firefighters' burns was they had an earlier fire that same night, and with the snow conditions, his gear was already wet from trenching through the snow. So all our viewers out there have to realize that wet gear lacks thermal stability, and that's why it's important, and our health and safety committee's been advocating it for at least at least 19 years that I've been here.
Since 1909, in fact.
Since 1909. But we want, and Bart, you'll like this. We want everybody in America, and I think I can even speak for Bobby Halton on this one too. We want everybody in America to have 2 sets of gear. So if your gear gets wet or your gear gets contaminated at a call, or it's got the products of combustion all over it, and it's just contaminated from just that every day going to a job, coming back. We want you to be able to safely decon the gear, wash the gear, and dry the gear, and not have to put on wet gear and put yourself at risk. Firefighters out there every day are out there doing it for the community. There's not one of my members that wouldn't make their wife or husband a widow and their kid's father or motherless for the community we serve. Every firefighter in America deserves 2 sets of gear. How's that?
Yeah, so
I think we should have a little flag waved in the background.
well, the problem from from where I'm at now, and it wasn't at the fire department, but now, and yesterday somebody texted or tweeted, "What about the cost?" We say that, but what about the cost? And so ultimately, I want to, you are correct. 2 sets of gear is what the appropriate solution for some departments, but the reality is not everyone can just go out there and buy another set. So my answer to the cost question is sit down at your health and safety committee and say, listen, we can't afford to buy 2 sets. What can we do today? Can we buy 5 extra coats in the most common sizes and 5 extra pants and boots and try to do a quartermaster system? It's in the NFPA. It's a recommendation for 2 sets of gear, and that works for a lot of departments. But a lot of departments, one, they're too big to make that work, and number 2, they can't afford it. But the health and safety.
What do you call it? We want people buying Tenkata, fabric, supporting American manufacturers. The cities, they find money for everything else. Our firefighters deserve 2 sets of gear, and they deserve gear dryers in the firehouses. Go through the city budget and see what we're spending money on. The one thing the fire department does that no other city agency does is we provide service to everybody at any time. You call 911, we just show up with the only goal to help, no paperwork even. The fire department's the best service the government offers across the board. We have a saying in New Haven, if you move into New Haven and somebody's breaking into your house, you call 911 and you say, someone's breaking into my house, and oh yeah, by the way, they're on fire. Because the fact is the fire department's always going to show up. It's going to show up quick and get the job done. Money, the politicians want to shake our hand with one hand and slash our budgets with the other. We need to be issue advocates. We need to do a better job of advocating for our members, and there are different methods, and like I said, we've been working on it for 19 years, and we're going to keep working on it, Chris.
Yep,
it's Chris's new job, but I think you mentioned some workarounds, and those are practical approaches, but we need to start moving to some of those practical approaches of, maybe I think that's actually a great idea. Get a couple extra sets that the battalion chief could have. It's not ideal because we want our gear fitted to each individual, but that's a step in the right direction. Make sure what's the cost to get a gear dryer. We got a gear dryer at 10s that I was able to get free from Williams Direct Dryer for the guys to have a gear dryer to dry their boots and coats. So there are some workarounds, but that's something that we definitely need to work at, and we need to support Tenkata and American manufacturing, right, PJ?
Absolutely. We're getting to that time where we got to wrap things up, but we do have a question here. And Bar, we kick this question to you. We're talking about the risk assessment. Is how often should those risk assessments be done? Is this a one and done thing? Is this a yearly process? Is this quarterly? Or is it only when you're purchasing your
No, the federal law says you need one today. So what I typically do is go in and help you write it, tell you what all the numbers are for what you wear today, but also it's for what do you want in the future. What do you want in the next time you go out to bid? Maybe your contract doesn't allow you to change anything, but it's a live document, and a health and safety committee should be looking at it at least once a year, and you should be inviting your vendors in to ask them, is there anything that we should be looking at in hoods, boots, gloves that is safer than what we wear today? And then you just you adjust your risk assessment to where you want to go. My other point is the IFF. I spoke last August at the at the Redmond Symposium on this very topic. It's taken everybody's taken this seriously, because a fire chief will never say no to safety if you give him some valid reasons, quantifiable reasons why, correct? It's just a matter of being educated about what questions you're asking and what test methods you're putting in a document. So we will all be better off if we take some time, and I'm happy to talk to anybody and help them purchase the most appropriate level of safety that they can afford for their municipality, whether it's a volunteer agency or a paid agency. It doesn't matter. The federal law says, and our professional standard says, we need a document. That may be a one-page document. I write 33-page documents. It's all about getting moving forward, right? We're a profession that gets stuff done, and this is what I think as a profession we need to move forward on.
I agree. We appreciate you answering that, and we have some other questions, but we'll hold off on those. And Frank and I will do the best that we can to get back to all of our followers and answer those. And anything that we can't answer, we'll absolutely kick it to you. But like Frank always does, I'll just grab it for you, Frank. I'd like to go around the table here, give everybody a chance to take a minute or two. I know Chief Walton said he can go over the clock yesterday because he pays the bills. We're far from paying the bills, so we don't want to go too far over. But we do want, everybody here is giving up their time today to support this hangout and help us out. So why don't we start all the way over there, and Ernie, give you a chance to have the floor.
Thanks. One of the things we didn't talk about is a thing called release and trap value. Your team members on the safety committee all bring value to the table. To make a sustainable, successful committee, they need to feel that they are part of it. They're vibrant. Their value is taken serious. Whether it's small accomplishments, but every single accomplishment needs to be celebrated. Okay. Thanks.
And I'd just like to add that a lot of research and effort goes in from TNCATA to come up with this gear and design it. We should do our part and keep it clean, provide the proper care and maintenance, and you got to be prepared every day. I mean, every day check over your turnout gear just like you would check over your Scott pack or the medical gear on the engine. You're doing a real disservice to yourself and your other firefighters on the fire ground if you're not checking your own gear and making sure it's in its maximum readiness.
Just to add on to that is key things like today, participate in these shows, watch them, stay educated into the trade, keep yourself informed, because like you said, the best thing is to ask the right questions. Ask those informative questions so you can get what you need. So this is the key thing. Stay into the trade magazines, watch these podcasts, and keep yourself up to date on this information.
Absolutely.
And reach out to TNCATA, reach out to Bart. I'm going to tweet out his personal cell phone. Make sure you only call him at dinner time or after 8 o'clock so you can see what it's like to be a union rep. But Bart's here to provide a valuable resource. We really appreciate you sponsoring our health and safety Google Hangout because, whether it's our viewers that are live or archive, I get calls and emails from people who watch these shows that are a year old, and they're just, they Google in the topic, and they end up pulling up a show that pertains to what they're dealing with, and here they're getting information constantly. So these Google Hangouts that are provided by Bobby Holland, Fire Engineering in Penwell are invaluable, and I'm proud to say that New Haven firefighters are going to continue participating in these Hangouts, and it's a great tool for our members and members of the fire service abroad.
Thanks for watching today. We appreciate it. We appreciate the support from Fire Engineering. We absolutely support the support. Appreciate the support from TNCATA. I know Shannon, who's running this hangout for us today in the back room, is going to put up the slide that shows their contact information and their website. I know everybody would much rather look at that than our mugs to close the show out. So thank everybody for being here. Our next hangout is March, I believe, 24th, the fourth Wednesday of every month, and we're going to kind of continue this conversation. Frank and I already have a loose plan together, and we're going to continue on this path of health and safety and firefighters turnout gear, and we're going to start getting into the weeds of what we can do, like Chris, you mentioned about washing our gear. Can we wash it too much? Inspection of our gear. What should we be doing every day to actually inspect our gear? So that's some of the things that we're going to be looking at next month. And to close it out would only be appropriate, Bart, why don't you have a last word and close it out from our sponsor, TNCATA, today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for TNCATA Protective Fabrics appreciates given this opportunity and I look forward to coming up to New Haven and helping you.
Terrific.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Bart.
Here.
Thank
Have a
you,
good day.
everybody. We appreciate you watching today. Have a great day and be safe.